Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I'm going to be creating some French Country Wall Decor, and I want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. For my first project, I'm going to begin by working on this square frame that I thrifted. I've already taken the glass and the backing out of it, and I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Espresso mineral paint to begin. I'm going to apply 2 coats of this over the top of the frame. Now this is just going to be a base coat. I'm going to be using milk paint a little bit later on, and I'm not a fan of this orangey pine tone. I want to see darker colors coming through underneath if we manage to get chippiness or crackle. So adding this Espresso mineral paint is going to give me the darker finish underneath that I want. I'm then going to be using Fusion's Hotel Robe milk paint. I'm going to be measuring out equal parts milk paint into a plastic container and then the same amount of water and adding that to the powder mixture. And then I'm going to stir it really well. I'm then going to begin adding it over the top of the dry Espresso mineral paint. This paint has a built-in sealer. The mineral paint has a built-in sealer, so adding the milk paint over the top means that we're going to get more crackle than we would if we used it over the top of bare wood. So I'm just working my way around, adding the milk paint. I'm using a chip brush that's going to help to create some texture because I'm definitely going for a sort of vintage French country worn look. I ended up doing 2 coats of the Hotel Robe milk paint, and I sped up the drying process in between each of the coats to help create more texture and that crackled effect that I really love. Next, I'm going to create the artwork to go in the center. I'm going to be using a watered down mixture of Paint Couture's Pine Cone over the top of a canvas here. I will put the measurements for this one in the description below. This is just a canvas that I picked up from Kmart Australia. If I'm having trouble with the paint moving, I will just use my mister to thin that paint out a bit more. And I am going to be using this as the background or the base for the artwork that I'm going to be creating today. I'm going to continue to move that paint, and I really want to keep my canvas wet. I'm then going to grab some more of that paint wash and start making a sort of oval sort of a shape, and then I'm going to start almost sketching out the shape of a flower and sort of just really thinking about the shape of a flower petals and how I want it to appear. I'm going to be working then with a lighter colored pink, and I'm working with C-shaped brush strokes and sort of not worrying at all about the pink mixing in with the brown paint wash, because as I said before, we want to keep that paint wet on the canvas so that colors are easier to blend. So you can see I'm just moving around the flower shape, and then I came in with a bit of white to lighten up the color of the petals, and each one of these shapes is done with the C shape. I then came in with a darker red that also has a little bit of orange in it, and I'm just continuing to layer my colors over the top in that rose shape. This rose is the center part of my design. I'm imagining a bouquet of roses in a vase. So once I'm finished with this one, I am going to start moving on to the other shapes that you can see that I have sketched out. These are the bases for the roses that I'm going to be adding to the rest of my design. You may notice that I have a little video playing on the right hand side. I could not have created this artwork without the help of Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with a wide depth and breadth of topics ranging from illustration, graphic design, photography, music, marketing, and more. There are thousands of creative classes in countless categories taught by creatives for creatives. Classes range from beginner to advanced, and it's a learn by doing approach to teaching where members can share their projects and get feedback from the community. I've already got a lot of classes saved, but this year I really wanted to learn how to paint flowers, so I started with modern still life acrylic painting. Lessons are set out in an easy to follow way, and I can always go back and rewatch anything that I need a bit more work on. If you would like to practice your creativity on Skillshare, make sure you check out the link in the description. The first 500 people to use my link will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Once I'm happy with the shape of my flowers, I moved on to the vase below. I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Abyss for my vase. First of all, I'm painting in the vase with Abyss, and then I'm coming in with a bit of white and blending that through. I'm really thinking about where the light and shadow is in this picture. That's definitely something that is mentioned in the Skillshare lessons, and it definitely adds a little bit more realism to your work. I'm going to bring in a bit more of that Abyss undiluted and add that to the right hand side to create a bit of shadow. Next, I'm going to use the Pine Cone paint wash that I was using before. This is a little bit less diluted, so it is a little bit darker. I'm just using that to paint in the table that the vase is sitting on. Next, I came in and started adding some leaves to my vase arrangement there, and this is just a green that I made by mixing Abyss and Spanish Sunrise together. I then used my mix of red velvet and Pacific Pearl to create this pinky tone. I'm just going to add some more flowers on the right to balance the design out a bit more. I then used some of Paint Couture's Spanish Sunrise on the table just to give it a bit of a lighter colour, being careful not to go over too far on the vase. Finally, it's time to add in some highlights. So this is Paint Couture's Pacific Pearl. Remember, my paint is still wet, so it's a lot easier to blend in the highlights than if my paint was dry. And again, I'm going in with those C shape or sort of like arc shapes to bring in my highlights, and always thinking about where the light would be sitting or hitting rather the flowers. Once I finished adding the highlights to the roses, I then started adding in some light on the vase. I am just using the white and sort of mixing it in with some of the other colors that I've created on my palette. Once my artwork was dry, I then flipped it over, and I'm going to be removing it from the canvas frame itself. I went with a smaller design here so that it would fit in my frame. So here I'm just working out exactly how much of it I'm going to be able to use. I've held it in position so that I have it where I want it to go. And then I'm actually just going to use hot glue to attach it. I'm going to be putting the backing back in, not the glass though. I'm going to be putting the backing in, so that will also help hold it in place, but I just wanted to make sure that it was going to sit exactly the way that I wanted it to. So I'm going to continue to add that hot glue around the inside part of the frame, pressing down on the canvas and pulling it tight. I then added the backing back in. I'll use the little tacks to hold that in place and reattach the hanger. And finally, I went in and signed it so that everyone would know it was an Erin original. And here's a look at our first finished project. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. This is the first time I have tried to paint roses like this, and I'm really pleased with how it's come together with the frame. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my second project, I'm going to be working on this wooden sign that I thrifted. I'm going to begin by adding some of Paint Couture's Pacific Pearl chalk paint. I ended up doing 2 coats of this over the top. When my 2 coats of paint were dry, I took out Roycycled's Queen Bee Decoupage Paper, and I'm just laying it over the top of the sign to work out how much of it I'm going to be using. I'm going to be creasing along the sides to work out where I need to cut it, and then I'm going to go in and trim it. I always like to leave about 1 centimeter of extra paper around the edges, just in case I'm not quite right with my measurements. I then took out Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium in Matte, and I'm going to be applying a generous coat over the top of the entire piece. Ultimately, my vision for this piece was to create a wall hook piece that could hang in an entryway, and I think this paper is going to just look beautiful. I then started smoothing down the decoupage paper into the wet medium. I am using a ball of cling wrap to help reduce the risk of any tearing, and I'm also using my mister to help relax the paper. Sometimes you'll find that it sort of puckers up at the ends and it makes it hard for you to lay your paper down flat, so using a mister bottle definitely helps helps to do that. You just need to make sure that you are being quite gentle then with your paper, because it is going to be a bit more fragile once you add that water. So I'm just going to continue to work my way across the board there, smoothing that down, and then I'm going to go over the top of the entire piece with more of that decoupage medium to seal it all in. I let my project dry completely, and then I came in with a piece of 220 grit sandpaper, and I am going to be running that sandpaper down on the edges of the decoupage paper, and this is going to help remove that excess, so I'm able to just tear that off in a nice neat line. Just make sure that your paper is completely dry. If you don't, you may end up getting tearing. I then went in with my craft knife, and there are gaps in between the boards of this sign, so I'm just going along with my knife. My paper's completely dry, and I am cutting through that so that we can see the slats. I really like the look of this. I think it's quite charming to be able to see those. So I'm just going to continue to cut along that line, and then I went in with my brush and I'm really working the bristles down into the gap so that I can get that paper all sealed and down. Next, I took out my tape measure and I'm working out where the center of the board is, because I'm going to start applying my hooks, and I want to work out the placement of them so that they are evenly spaced. I'm also going to work out the spacing on that center board as well. I'm just using a lead pencil to mark out where I'm going to have to do my pre-drilling. And this will also help me make sure that I keep everything lined up. I'm then going to come in with my drill and start making my little pilot holes so that I don't have any issues with the screws going in. I will do that for each of the hooks. And then I am going to add the hooks back in place and start adding the screws, screwing them in place one at a time. Now, thankfully, this board already has attachments on the back for hanging. And here's a look at our second finished product. This was quite a quick and easy project, but I think it is definitely a beautiful piece that would look great in anyone's entryway. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final project, I'm going to be working on this little wooden plaque that I thrifted for just $1. It's already been painted, so I'm going to take out my Buttercream chalk paint. I did have this open for a while on a hot day, so it has thickened up quite nicely. So I'm just going to give it a good stir, and then I'm going to go straight over the top. And as I was adding this, however, I did decide that it wasn't quite thick enough to completely hide the raised paint details that were already on this project. So I did then decide that I was going to take out my salt wash texture additive. I'm just going to add a little bit into my paint and then give it a good stir. I like to add just a little bit at a time so that I don't overdo it. This is going to thicken up the paint and make it easier to hide the texture that's already on the plaque. So once the first coat was dry, I went in with a second coat, but this time with that salt wash mixed in, and that definitely did the trick. Now, I probably could have sanded the plaque to begin with, but I'm definitely just wanting to keep things very simple. I know not everybody has access to an orbital sander, so this is an option if you have something that has texture on it that you want to hide. Grab that salt wash out and you can paint straight over the top. When that was dry, I took out IOD's Gloria paint inlay. Now, this is a Christmas inlay, but there are some items in there that would definitely be great for everyday, more neutral projects. I love this one with the little birds, but I am going to cut off the lettering. They won't fit anyway on this project, and I will just save them for future use. So I'm going to cut those excess letters off, and then keeping in mind that often when you use paint inlays with paint, you get a little bit of a halo around the edge. Sometimes when you're using thick paint, you get a halo around the edge of your design. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to cut a bit closer to the design so that the if any lines show, they're not going to look odd. I'm then going to go in with another coat of my Buttercream salt wash mixture. I'm going to put a nice even coat down over the top of the entire plaque, making sure that my brush strokes are all going in the same direction. And then I'm going to press the paint inlay design side down. The grid should be facing up at you. I'm going to press that down and gently press it into the paint. You don't want to press too hard because you could get some smearing. And then I'm going to use my mister to wet that and dampen it, and then a damp cloth or a wet wipe to go over the top of it. It is the water that helps to activate the pigments in the paint inlay itself. So once I've done that and I'm happy with that, I'm going to let it dry completely, and then I'm going to come in with my mister and lightly mist the design again. This is going to help the paint inlay to release. I'm going to give it about 60 seconds, and then I'm going to start to pull the design away. And this part is definitely always the most satisfying part, when you see that design has been left behind. I did have a tiny little bit of paint peeling up a little bit in the center there, so I just sort of changed direction and started pulling from the other side. But this is not meant to be perfect, that's fine. We're going for a vintage look. So I just continued to pull the inlay back. I'll set this off to the side because I will get another use out of it. I did get a slight little halo around the edge, so I'm just going to use my wet wipe to gently rub over the top of that line to help blend it a little bit. I'm not too worried when this happens, but if you are a bit of a perfectionist, this is one way you could go in and fix that, or you could go in with a small artist brush and layer some more of your base paint color over the top of that. But this definitely helps to minimize the look of the line. I then went in and very lightly, with a decent amount of clear coat on my brush, I went in and sealed over the top. Sometimes it's a good idea to use a spray sealer if you're not very confident with this, but it turned out okay this time. When that was dry, I took out my Abundance Mineral Paint by Paint Couture, and I am just going to go around the edge of my little plaque there and create a nice blue border. When that was dry, I took out IOD's Vintage Textures stamp. I am using the Crackle stamp, and I'm just adding some of IOD's permanent black ink to one small section there, and then I'm going to lightly press the stamp in random areas. This is going to give the effect of crackled paint or a crackled finish. So I'm just going to continue to press that down, and then I actually like to go in with a wet wipe and pull back some of that ink. It gives it a bit more of a faded look. My surface is sealed, so I'm able to do this. And just be mindful though, I have only done this technique with IOD ink. I then came in with Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm just going in and almost colouring in the paint inlay, in particular the bow down the bottom. I just like this pop of colour. Finally, I just took out a wet wipe, and I'm going to run that over the top of the section that has the Abundance mineral paint on it. I'm doing a bit of wet distressing. This is going to give it a bit more of a vintage look, and then I will also add a little hook on the back of this for hanging. And here's our finished wall plaque. I think this turned out really sweet. I love using paint inlays. You always get a really beautiful, almost hand-painted effect. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video and that it's inspired you to get creating some French country wall decor for your home. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.